This is a question about your possibly long-term writing a biography of Jefferson, and the question is, with so many competitive accounts, what unusual perspective would you bring?
Why are you doing this, Annette? I hope the perspective that I bring is, I think there have been many great biographies of Jefferson, but, well, there are two things. I think that I would bring a perspective that I would like to try to situate him in his place and time as a slaveholder. I think that that is something that has kind of gotten away from, I mean, the politics are important. I mean, this is one of the, is a great political figure of the world, not just America, and it's important to focus on that, but it's, most of the biographies tend to, and they follow that track, of him in his public life, and not a lot about what is going on in the private life. When I was working on this book, I mean, I'd read other biographies, and I sort of assumed that some of the things that I needed for my work would be in those books. You know how you think, oh, surely I'll go look at this. No, it's not there, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just that Malone said he was 5 or 6 men rolled up into one. I would say probably 8 or 9 rolled up into one. There's so much material, and I would like to, I want to do the politics because I love the politics. I teach, the class I teach at Rutgers is about the early American Republic, and one of my students walked up to me one day sheepishly and said, "Professor Gordon-Reed, are we going to talk about slavery in this class?" And I said, "Yes, we are. We will get to that." I mean, I love politics, and I want to do that as well, but I really want to situate him here. As a slave owner, I would like to see him with the people around him, the non-famous people around him, the non-famous friends that he had that tell you a great deal about him. People like Thomas Bell, who lived with Mary Hemings, Sally Hemings' sister, on Main Street in Charlottesville, was one of Jefferson's closest friends, but you don't see him anywhere. He is sort of a middling, prosperous person who offered Jefferson the sort of perspective of ordinary people. So the perspective I would bring would be, more sort of Monticello-centered. I'd like to know about Albemarle County. I mean, I was talking about France. I don't have a sense of what that place was like from reading about him. I don't know, I just don't know very much about that world. So I think I would want to bring much more of the locale, the local area into the story to try to even things out a bit. So that's part of it. And, I was working on this, and I kept, even going through the papers, I'd say, why has no one written about this? Why has no one written about this? There's just, it's too much material. And the way to rein it in, for me, my perspective would be much more a localized Jefferson with the politics, sort of inverted, with the politics as a part of it.
Have you had much opportunity to talk with members of the Hemings descendants?
Yes, I have. On a number of occasions. I have to say, people always ask me if I use them very much in my research, and the answer is no. I might probably use them or talk to them much more about the second volume, but I pretty much live in the 18th century, in the 19th century, and I know them socially, and that's primarily, they don't really talk very much about, when we're together, the times that I've been with them, we're talking about stuff that's going on now, much less, not the things that went on in the past. But I do know some of them.
You referred to Sally Hemings' first child as Jefferson's child. Didn't the 1998 DNA study disprove that?
No, because as I say in the book, and as I say in my first book, I think you could probably glean that from my first book, Sally Hemings' first child, born in 1790, died. And that's, I believe that. So she did not have a child who grew up to have a descendant who could be tested in 1998. So, no. And the reason I can talk about why I think well, Madison Hemings said that child died. There is no record of the child in Jefferson's farm book. The inoculation records, which I didn't get a chance to put in the text of the book, but I devote a footnote to them. Jefferson began a plan of vaccinations of enslaved people, and actually his family too. I mean, this is an interesting thing about sort of medicine, when people used to think that black blood was different than white blood and all these kinds of things. He has vaccinated Burl Colbert and Joe Fawcett, and takes the inoculum from them and vaccinates his granddaughters and other enslaved people and other of his relatives. He begins this process in 1801, and he vaccinates Beverly and Harriet Hemings in 1802, and he vaccinates Madison and Eston Hemings in 1816, and they're all listed as Sally Hemings' children. There's no mention of any other child. So not only is there not in a farm book, but even in other records, these records have not been published yet. They're in the process of being published by the papers of Thomas Jefferson. So there is no, the DNA didn't disprove it because, I mean, as I sort of hint mightily in the first book and say flat out in this book, I mean, I've always believed that the child died. So there is no, I mean, there was no descendant who could be tested in 1998, and that's why, I mean, Gene Foster, the first time I met Gene, I talked to Gene, he didn't know me from Adam or Eve, whatever, how you should say it, and they announced they were doing the test, and I got his phone number, and I called him up, and I introduced myself, and he says, yes, I know who you are, and I said, you know, at some point, well, Dr. Foster, have you talked to these people, the Woodsons, do you know what's going to happen? And I'll never forget, he said, Professor Gordon-Reed, we don't know what's going to happen. And I said, well, I kind of do. I kind of think it's going to happen. And he said, you know, these are adults. And he was right. They are adults, and they have a right to participate in this and do this and so forth. So my point is that I was not surprised at what happened, because I don't believe that she had a child who lived long enough to get married, have children, and have descendants that he would have been tested in 1998.